Coastlines are creeping inward and cities are sinking. Millions of people are already living with water at their doorstep. These are 15 places most at risk of being transformed or even lost by rising water levels. Let's start with number 15, Miami, Florida. So Miami is often cited as one of the world's most vulnerable major cities when it comes to rising sea levels. It's built on porous limestone and sits only a few feet above the current sea level. The city faces challenges that are not only about storm surges, but about the very ground that it sits on. The numbers are pretty stark. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, sea levels around South Florida have already risen about 8 inches since 1950, and some projections suggest they could rise by more than 2 feet by 2060 if the current trend continues. For Miami, this would mean widespread flooding, even on sunny days without rain. That's a phenomenon already being observed in the form of king tide floods. Streets and neighborhoods like Miami Beach now experience regular flooding, disrupting traffic and damaging the infrastructure. Miami Beach, for example, has spent hundreds of millions installing pumps, raising streets, and upgrading their drainage systems. Those measures have helped reduce flooding in some areas, but they're costly and may only buy a little time. Critics point out that long-term sea level rise could outpace those defenses, especially if global greenhouse gas emissions remain high. Miami does face some broader economic risks too. The region is home to major ports, airports, and tourism infrastructure, and flooding there would have national and international consequences. Insurance companies have already begun adjusting premiums in response to this increased risk, raising questions about long-term affordability for people and businesses. While Miami has become a leader in adaptation efforts, experts emphasize that its vulnerability is profound. The combination of geology, the urban development, and accelerating sea level rise makes it one of the most at-risk places in the world. Number 14. Jakarta, Indonesia. Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, it's one of the fastest sinking cities on Earth. It struggles with rising water levels that are compounded by local land subsidence, making the situation there especially dire. The city of more than 10 million people is built on a swampy ground, crisscrossed by rivers and located along a low-lying coastline. According to Indonesia's National Development Planning Agency, parts of Jakarta are sinking by 25 centimeters, that's nearly 10 inches, a year. This subsidence problem, caused by the over-extraction of groundwater as residents and industries pump water from the underground aquifer to meet demand, combined with global sea level rise, the effect is devastating. Nearly 40% of the city is now below sea level. In 2007, a catastrophic flood submerged more than 70% of the city and displaced more than 400,000 people. More recently, in early 2020, heavy rains triggered floods and landslides that killed at least 66 people and forced tens of thousands to evacuate. One ambitious project is the construction of a giant seawall across Jakarta Bay, known as the Great Garuda Project. This is shaped like the natural bird, Garuda, and the wall is designed to protect the city from rising seas while creating new land for development. Given the severity of this problem, the government announced plans in 2019 to move the capital from Jakarta to a new city on the island of Borneo. While Jakarta will remain Indonesia's economic hub, this move reflects that recognition that the city's long-term future is threatened. For the millions of people who call Jakarta home, the risk is not abstract. It's visible in the flooded streets, the damaged homes, and the growing sense that the city itself is slowly disappearing. Among all the global capitals, Jakarta may be the most visibly at risk from rising water, a sobering example of what unchecked climate pressure can mean for a modern metropolis. Number 13. The Maldives. The Maldives, an island nation in the Indian Ocean, has become a symbol of the risks posed by rising sea levels. It's comprised of 26 atolls and more than 1,000 small islands. It's home to around 500,000 people and sits on average just 1.5 meters or about 5 feet above sea level. That makes it the lowest lying country in the world. This does put the Maldives in extreme danger. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has projected that global sea levels could rise by nearly 1 meter by the end of the century under the high emission scenarios. For the Maldives, even half that would be catastrophic. A 1 meter rise would inundate much of the country, potentially making islands uninhabitable. The Maldives has experienced the effects of sea level rise and climate change firsthand. Increased flooding during high tides, known locally as swells, has damaged homes and infrastructure. Coastal erosion has forced communities to move, and resorts, the backbone of the country's tourism-dependent economy, have had to spend heavily on protection. This nation also did face freshwater shortages due to rising salinity, leading to desalination projects. In 2009, then-President Nasheed held an underwater cabinet meeting to dramatize the risks of rising seas. Domestically, the government has invested adaptation strategies like seawalls and land reclamation, and the island of Hulhurmale, near the capital of Male, is a reclaimed island built higher than most others and designed to house up to 250,000 people as a safe haven from sea level rise. But the cost of large-scale protection is immense. The Maldives' economy is heavily dependent on tourism and fishing, both of which are threatened by this climate impact. Rising seas do also increase the risk of storm surges from tropical cyclones, which can devastate these low-lying islands. Number 12. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is a city that's defined by its relationship with water and its vulnerability to it. Situated along the Mississippi and bordered by Lake Pontchartrain and the Gulf of Mexico, much of the city lies below sea level. Rising seas, land subsidence, and the threat of powerful hurricanes makes it one of the most at-risk cities in the U.S. The city's struggles were laid bare in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina caused catastrophic levee failures and flooding. 80% of New Orleans was submerged, and more than 1,800 people were killed. Since then, tens of billions of dollars have been invested in upgrading the levees, the flood walls, and the pumping systems, with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. But according to NOAA, the Gulf is experiencing sea level rise at a faster rate than average, and combined with local land subsidence, relative sea levels around New Orleans are projected to rise by more than 1.5 feet by 2050. New Orleans' unique geography does compound this problem. The city is built on soft, sinking soil, and large areas are below sea level, kept dry only through a complex system of levees and pumps. As the sea rises, the strain on those systems increases. Heavy rainfall, which is becoming more common, can overwhelm pumps and drainage infrastructure, which leads to flash flooding. Local officials are pursuing a mix of hard defenses like levees and seawalls and some softer strategies, including coastal restoration projects that rebuild the wetlands to act as a natural barrier. These wetlands, once widespread, have been disappearing at alarming rates due to human activity and erosion. Restoring them is seen as essential to reducing the storm surge risk. The city can adapt, but adaptation requires continuous investment, innovation, and acknowledgement that water will always define both the risks and the identity of New Orleans. Number 11. Bangkok, Thailand. Bangkok, Thailand's capital. It's one of the largest cities in Southeast Asia. It's home to more than 10 million people. It's also one of the most at risk from rising water. Built on the low-lying floodplain of the Chao Phraya River, only about 1.5 meters above sea level, Bangkok faces a dangerous combination of sea level rise and seasonal flooding. One of the most pressing issues here is the sinking ground. Due to decades of groundwater extraction, parts of Bangkok are subsiding at rates of 1 to 2 centimeters a year. This magnifies the effects of any sea level rise. The World Bank has projected that if trends continue, much of Bangkok could be underwater by 2030 during high tides and heavy storms. Flooding is already a serious problem. In 2011, Thailand experienced one of its worst flood disasters in decades. Torrential rains caused rivers to overflow, and large sections of Bangkok were submerged for weeks. These floods killed more than 800 people, and it caused billions of dollars worth of economic damage. The Thai government responded with a mix of strategies. Flood barriers, dikes, and water retention areas have been expanded, and pumping stations have been upgraded. Urban planning initiatives now emphasize something called monkey cheeks. These are traditional Thai water management methods where reservoirs are created to temporarily store excess water during storms. Rising seas threaten more than just homes and infrastructure. Their economic role as a major hub for finance and trade means widespread flooding would carry regional and global consequences. Insurance costs, too, are rising, and analysts warn of potential long-term impacts on investment if risks aren't managed. But as the sea levels rise, the gap between the wealthy areas protected by better infrastructure and poorer neighborhoods left exposed is likely to widen. While solutions are being pursued, the scale of the problem makes Bangkok one of the cities most at risk from rising seas. Number 10. Venice, Italy. Of course, few cities in the world are as iconic and vulnerable to rising water as Venice. Built on a series of islands and lagoons in the Adriatic Sea, Venice is world-renowned for its canals, historic architecture, and its culture, yet its very foundations are threatened by the encroaching sea. Flooding has always been a part of life in Venice, but the phenomenon known as acqua alta, a periodic high tide that inundates the city, has become increasingly severe. In November 2019, Venice experienced its second worst flood in history, with water levels reaching over 6 feet. Well, St. Mark's Basilica, centuries old and located on one of the lowest areas, was badly damaged. Venice faces a dual threat: sea level rise and local subsidence. The city has been slowly sinking due to natural processes and, of course, human activity, including past groundwater extraction. And according to Italy's National Research Council, sea levels in Venice could rise by as much as 1 meter by 2100, a scenario that would put much of the city at permanent risk. To combat this, Italy's invested in the MOSE project. This is a massive system of barriers designed to protect Venice from high tides. The project was first conceived in the 1980s, involves 78 gates installed at 3 inlets to the lagoon, and these gates can be raised to block the incoming tide during extreme events. After years of delays and cost overruns, MOSE became operational in 2020, and it's already been used successfully. Venice is a warning and a case study. Its struggles show how climate change can threaten even the world's most celebrated cities. For now, the MOSE system has bought Venice a bit of time, but without broader global action on climate change though, its long-term fate remains uncertain. Number 9. Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt's second-largest city and an important Mediterranean port, is acutely vulnerable to rising seas. Founded more than 2,000 years ago, the city is a cultural landmark and a hub for millions of people. Today, its low-lying geography and dense coastal development make it one of the most at-risk urban areas in the Middle East. A study published in Nature Communications in 2019 estimated that by 2050, as many as 5 million Egyptians could be living in areas below annual flood levels, with Alexandria a central hotspot. Flooding here is already a recurring problem. Heavy rains in 2015 overwhelmed the city's outdated drainage system, leading to flooding that displaced residents. More recently, storm surges in the Mediterranean have eroded the beaches and seawalls there, increasing the frequency of low-lying floods in neighborhoods. But beyond the homes and infrastructure, their cultural heritage is under threat. The city's home to ancient sites, including remnants of the Pharaoh's Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the Alexandrina Biblioteca, a modern library built to honor the city's historic role as a center of learning. And of course, economically, Alexandria is crucial to Egypt. Its ports handle a large share of the nation's imports and exports, particularly grain shipments. Fisheries, another key sector, are also threatened by saltwater intrusion and ecosystem shift caused by climate change. Alexandria's fate encapsulates the challenges faced by many cities in developing countries: rapid urbanization, limited infrastructure, and increasing exposure to climate-driven risk. Without large-scale adaptation, the combination of sea level rise and subsidence could make parts of this city uninhabitable. Number 8. Dhaka, Bangladesh. Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and home to more than 20 million people in its metropolitan area, is among the most densely populated cities in the world. While the city itself is inland, it sits within the huge Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, one of the world's lowest-lying regions. Rising seas here not only threaten Dhaka, but also the millions of people across Bangladesh who may be forced to migrate there as coastal areas become uninhabitable. Bangladesh has long been recognized as ground zero for climate impact. According to the World Bank, a 1-meter rise in sea levels could inundate 17% of the country and displace tens of millions of people. Much of that population would likely move to Dhaka, which is already struggling. Dhaka itself is prone to flooding. Heavy monsoon rains frequently overwhelm the drainage, and river level rise can dramatically change during storm surges. In 2017, huge floods displaced millions across Bangladesh, and Dhaka saw significant disruption. Large numbers of people live in informal settlements along the flood-prone areas, often with little protection from rising water. When floods happen, these communities are the hardest hit, suffering the loss of homes, livelihoods, and health. Waterborne diseases like cholera and diarrhea spread easily after these floods, which create public health crises. Yet the scale of this challenge is immense. The United Nations warned that Bangladesh could see one of the largest climate migration crises of the 21st century, with Dhaka at the center of it. Floods that disrupt factories and transport networks could have far-reaching consequences. Additionally, their infrastructure like roads, power plants, and hospitals are all exposed. Dhaka's story isn't just about rising sea, it's about cascading effect. As coastal areas are submerged, people move inland, straining the city further. Rising water levels thus create a chain reaction: loss of land, mass migration, overburdened infrastructure, and escalating risks within the capital. For Bangladesh, and for Dhaka in particular, adapting to these pressures is not a distant concern, but an urgent, ongoing struggle. Moving on to number 7, Shanghai, China. Shanghai is China's largest city and one of the most important financial hubs in Asia. It's also one of the world's most vulnerable megacities. It's located on the Yangtze River Delta. Much of Shanghai sits only a few meters above sea level. With more than 25 million residents, the stakes here are enormous. Over the past century, Shanghai has sunk by several meters due to excessive groundwater extraction. And while regulations have reduced subsidence in recent years, the legacy of this sinking makes the city more susceptible to sea level change. Flooding is already a recurrent issue here. Seasonal typhoons bring in the heavy rain and storm surges that test the city's defenses. In 1997, Typhoon Winnie caused significant flooding. And in 2013, another typhoon left parts of the city underwater, displacing thousands and causing billions in damage. They have invested heavily in flood defense. Seawalls, levees, they stretch for hundreds of kilometers along the city's coast. Pumping stations, floodgates, and drainage systems are all critical to managing the water during heavy rain. Still though, experts warn that those measures may be overwhelmed if sea level rise accelerates. Shanghai is home to the world's busiest container port, which handles a significant share of our global trade. The financial district houses the Shanghai Stock Exchange and headquarters of major banks. Disruptions to those sectors due to floods would have regional and even global consequences. The city's defenses may be holding for now, but rising seas combined with land subsidence means that long-term viability will require continuous investment. Number 6. Kolkata, India. Kolkata, formerly Calcutta, is one of India's largest cities and a historic cultural center. It sits in the Ganges Delta, and it's highly vulnerable to rising water levels both from sea level rise and increased flooding in the delta. With more than 14 million people here in the metropolitan area, the risks are human and economic. According to the IPCC, sea levels in the Bay of Bengal are rising faster than the global average. Even modest increases can cause major damage here, as the city is already prone to monsoon flooding. The Sundarbans, the mangrove forest south of Kolkata, acts as a buffer against storm surges, but this ecosystem is under severe stress from erosion and human encroachment. Saltwater intrusion, too, is also affecting agriculture and water supplies in the region, which puts more pressure on the city's resources. In 2021, Cyclone Yas brought storm surges that flooded parts of West Bengal, including areas near Kolkata, which displaced tens of thousands. Flooding threatens not only the infrastructure and the people, but the livelihoods of millions. Informal settlements, which house large portions of the population, are particularly exposed. Residents of these areas often lack resources to rebuild after disasters, which perpetuates the cycle of poverty. International organizations, including the World Bank, have highlighted Kolkata as one of the global cities most in need of investment in climate resilience. Their challenges are emblematic of those facing many South Asian cities: rapid population growth, fragile infrastructure, and exposure to risk. Unless substantial investments are made, rising water levels could severely disrupt life here, leaving millions at risk of displacement and economic hardship. Number 5. Manila, Philippines. Manila, the capital of the Philippines and home to more than 13 million people in the wider metropolitan area, is one of the world's most at-risk megacities when it comes to sea level. Studies show that Manila is sinking by 10 centimeters a year in some districts, largely due to groundwater extraction and the weight of uncontrolled construction. When combined with sea level rise, this subsidence leaves huge areas of the city vulnerable to flooding. And according to a 2019 Nature Communications study, large parts of Metro Manila could be below the annual flood line by 2050. Typhoons frequently put that vulnerability on display. In 2009, Typhoon Katsana brought record rainfall that submerged 80% of the city. Hundreds were killed and nearly 500,000 people were displaced. More recently, Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, though, centered farther south, highlighted the immense destructive potential of storm surges here. Its infrastructure struggled to keep pace with growth, and informal settlements often line the rivers and canals with little flood protection. For poor communities, each flood brings devastating losses that are difficult to recover from. The Philippine government has launched several major flood control projects. The Metro Manila Flood Management Project, supported by the World Bank, aims to modernize pumping stations and improve their drainage. Seawalls and embankments along the bay are also being reinforced, yet experts warn that adaptation needs to accelerate dramatically to keep pace with the rising risk. For residents, floods are not just a future concern but a present reality, and one that grows worse with each passing year. Manila's story shows how rising seas interact with human factors like subsidence and growth. Without comprehensive measures, the city could face increasing displacement and economic loss. Number 4. Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Rotterdam, one of Europe's largest ports and a hub of global trade, has lived with the sea for centuries, and much of Netherlands lies below sea level, and Rotterdam is no exception. Rising water here pose a direct threat to the city. But unlike many others on this list, Rotterdam has become a global leader in flood management. The risks are real. The North Sea is projected to rise by up to 1 meter by 2100 under high-emission scenarios, and storm surges can add several more meters of water. Rotterdam's port, which handles hundreds of millions of tons of cargo annually, sits on low-lying land that would be inundated. The Dutch have responded with engineering. Rotterdam is protected by an extensive system of dikes, levees, and storm surge barriers. The most famous is a giant movable barrier completed in 1997 at the mouth of the canal, each of its 2 arms longer than the Eiffel Tower, and together they close to shield the city from oncoming surges. The system is automated to respond to storm forecasts, ensure rapid deployment when needed. The city has also developed something called water plazas, public spaces that double as reservoirs during heavy rain. Green roofs and permeable surfaces help absorb storm water, reducing strain on drainage systems. But despite the efforts, there are challenges. Climate change threatens to increase not only sea levels, but river flooding from the Rhine and the Meuse. The Netherlands Delta program, that's a long-term government initiative, continues to update defenses with future projections in mind, but costs are immense. Maintaining the system will require continuous investment. The city may be among the best prepared in the world. Still, though, it remains one of the most at risk due to its geography. The city's survival depends on a delicate balance of human ingenuity and constant vigilance, proving that even the most advanced defenses can't eliminate the risk posed by climate change. Number 3. Lagos, Nigeria. Lagos is Nigeria's largest city and one of the fastest-growing urban centers. It's also one of the most vulnerable to rising seas. Lagos faces a combination of environmental, social, and economic risks that make it a focal point in discussions about climate change. The city lies on the Gulf of Guinea, with large portions of its area built on reclaimed land, islands, and lagoons. And according to their meteorological agency and studies by the IPCC, sea levels here along West Africa's coast are rising faster than the global average. Even a modest rise of half a meter by 2100 could displace millions in Lagos. Flooding is already a recurring crisis. In 2012, catastrophic floods across Nigeria killed more than 300 people and displaced millions, with Lagos among the most severely affected regions. More recent floods in 2022 again highlighted the city's vulnerability. And coastal erosion adds another challenge. Bar Beach, once a popular recreation area here, has eroded significantly by rising tides. Large-scale development projects like the construction of the Eco-Atlantic, a new city built on reclaimed land off the coast, have attempted to respond to these challenges. The economic stakes are enormous here. Lagos is the nation's financial hub. It's home to major ports, banks, and industries, and the Port of Lagos handles a significant share of Nigeria's imports and exports. Socially, Lagos does epitomize the human dimension of climate change. Millions live in informal housing with little protection to floods, and for those communities, rising seas are not an abstract concern but a daily threat to your survival. International organizations have highlighted that Lagos is a priority area for climate funding. Still, experts caution without large-scale investment, the risks may outpace the city's ability to adapt. Its future is going to depend not only on engineering, but also on addressing social inequality and managing growth. Number 2. The Sundarbans, India and Bangladesh. Kolkata and the Sundarbans together represent one of the most at-risk regions. Situated in a delta, this area combines enormous concentrations of people. The delta itself is the largest in the world, covering more than 100,000 square kilometers, and it is both the source of livelihood for tens of millions and an ecological treasure. Yet this landscape is flat, low-lying, and constantly shaped by the interaction of fresh water from the rivers and salt water from the Bay of Bengal. The Sundarbans, stretching across southern Bangladesh and southern West Bengal, is equally, if not more vulnerable than Kolkata. The region is world-famous for the largest mangrove forest on Earth, covering roughly 10,000 square kilometers, of which about 60% is in Bangladesh and 40% in India. Its ecology is tied to the balance of fresh and salt water. Rising seas upset this balance, pushing salt further inland and disrupting human agriculture and the ecosystems here. The human stakes are enormous. More than 120 million people live in the Greater Delta region, with millions depending directly on agriculture, fishing, and forestry. It's one of the most densely populated regions in the world, and it is already experiencing the effect of rising water. According to the IPCC, the Bay of Bengal is rising faster than the global averages. Even a rise of 50 centimeters would displace millions, and in low-lying regions, even smaller increases are already rendering land uninhabitable. Dozens of small islands here have already been partially or fully submerged. Goramara Island in India's West Bengal has lost two-thirds of its land area since the 1970s. Another island, Loachara, is home to more than 10,000 people and was completely submerged by the sea in the late 1980s. Residents were resettled on a nearby Sagar Island, which itself faces severe erosion and flooding. In 2009, Cyclone Isla devastated the Sundarbans, displacing more than 1 million and destroying embankments that protect villages. In May of 2020, Cyclone Amphan, one of the strongest storms to hit the region in decades, caused catastrophic damage. Even in Kolkata, Amphan caused widespread destruction, knocking out power, toppling trees, and flooding neighborhoods. For the Sundarbans, these impacts are felt most acutely by subsistence farmers and fishermen, whose livelihoods are directly tied to the land and water. Saltwater intrusion damages the rice paddies and freshwater ponds used for aquaculture, while storm surges wash away nets, boats, and infrastructure. Families who lose land or income often migrate to cities like Kolkata, adding pressure to already crowded areas. They're already struggling with overcrowding, air pollution, and inadequate infrastructure. They have to now also grapple with being a destination for climate migrants from its own hinterlands. Adaptation efforts are underway, but they face some challenges. In the Sundarbans, embankments are constantly rebuilt or reinforced, but they're repeatedly breached by cyclones and tidal surge. Some scientists and policymakers argue that the hard defenses alone are not sustainable, and they advocate for managed retreat from the most vulnerable areas. Still, others emphasize the importance of restoring the mangroves, which act as natural buffers against the wave and storm surges. Projects are being supported by governments and NGOs. They've planted millions of mangroves in recent years, but the scale of loss here often outpaces those gains. Number 1. New York City, the United States. New York City, it's one of the world's great global capitals. It faces a future shaped by rising water. The city of over 8.5 million people sits on a series of islands and low-lying coastal areas that are already experiencing the effects. As seas continue to rise along the U.S. East Coast at a faster pace than the global average, the risks to New York are profound. Geographically, New York is exposed because of its setting. Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx are all bordered by tidal water, the Hudson River, East River, and Long Island Sound, and the Atlantic Ocean. The Battery at the southern tip of Manhattan sits only a few feet above sea level, and other districts like the Rockaways in Queens, Coney Island in Brooklyn, and large portions of Staten Island face direct exposure to the sea. In a city with so much shoreline, nearly 520 miles, the scale of its vulnerability is huge. The projections are a bit sobering. According to the New York City Panel on Climate Change, local sea levels have already risen by about a foot over the past century, and they could rise by another 11 to 30 inches by the 2050s. By the end of the century, sea levels in New York Harbor could be more than 6 feet higher than today. The risk is not only from gradual encroachment of the sea, but also from storm surges that ride on top of higher baselines. The impact of these storm surges was brought home dramatically in October of 2012 when Hurricane Sandy hit New York. Although downgraded from a hurricane to a post-tropical cyclone by the time it made landfall, Sandy carried an enormous wind field and a powerful storm surge. The surge pushed more than 13 feet into New York Harbor, flooding subway tunnels, electrical substations, and homes. Lower Manhattan went dark for days, and neighborhoods like Red Hook and Rockaways and Staten Island's East Shore were devastated. The storm cost 44 deaths and the city billions of dollars in damages. In the years since Sandy, though, they've embarked on one of the most ambitious adaptation efforts in the world. Billions of dollars have been invested into projects. The Big U, a planned series of flood barriers and green spaces wrapping around Lower Manhattan, is one of the most high-profile projects. Others include dune restoration in the Rockaways, seawalls on Staten Island, and investments in elevating critical infrastructure. These adaptation strategies extend beyond just the infrastructure, though. The city is increasingly focused on living shorelines and green projects. Wetlands, oyster reefs, and restored marshes are being used to absorb the wave energy and reduce surge impact. The Billion Oyster Project, for example, aims to restore oyster reefs in New York Harbor, both to improve water quality and to serve as a natural buffer. Similarly, parks and open spaces are being redesigned for flood safety, storing water during storms and releasing it afterwards. Still, though, the challenges are huge. The cost of these projects are measured in the tens of billions of dollars, and construction timelines stretch for years. Policymakers face some difficult choices about where to invest, which areas to protect, and which may eventually need to retreat. Some experts argue a managed retreat, relocating communities away from the most prone areas, will be necessary in the long run. Yet in a dense historic city like New York, retreat is politically and socially fraught with challenge. NOAA does project that sea levels along the northeast United States coast could rise by more than a foot in just the next 3 decades. This means that what once was considered a 100-year flood event could become a regular occurrence by mid-century. With its enormous population, its global economic role, and extensive coast, it's one of the places where the consequences of sea level rise will be most visible and most consequential. The choices the city makes now will be watched around the world, serving as a warning and an example for other coastal cities facing the same fate.